based in Chennai, Bangalore, and Mumbai. Mr. V. Raghuraman, Advocate, Bangalore, and Mr. K. Vaitishwaran, Advocate, Chennai, are two other partners in the firm. This boutique firm specializes in indirect taxation, direct taxation, international taxation, arbitration, corporate law, etc. Shailesh Bhai has also got representative industry experience in areas of central excise, service tax, custom, GST, and VAT. In manufacturing, service sector, and distributive trade, representing diverse sectors. Shailesh Bhai has been a very regular faculty at various professional bodies as well as trade and industry forums on his chosen field. He has already delivered more than 75 lectures since April 2017 on various aspects of GST all over the India. Shailesh Bhai is a regular columnist in Vyapar, a bi-weekly business newspaper of Janmabhoomi Group, and also midday on service tax, central excise, and GST, and also has contributed number of articles to various magazines as well as taxation websites like TUI1. Besides these professional bodies like Chamber of Tax Consultant, AIFTP, Shailesh Bhai is also associated with various trade and industry bodies, including Indian Merchant Chambers. So with this, I introduce before you Advocate Shailesh Bhai Sheth, who is having rich experience, who will guide us on the current litigative issues in GST. Shailesh Bhai, the flow is yours. Without wasting the precious time of yours and members, I'll not come between you and members. So floor is yours, sir. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Isar Bhai. And it has been really a pleasure and privilege to be with all of you on this virtual mode. I think this is the first webinar which I'm addressing at the Surat branch. Today's topics, after due deliberations with Chairman Mr. Jivani, we have chosen a few certain burning issues which are actually also right now mired into litigation in the high courts as well. And some of the issues have also the day-to-day practical ramifications. So accordingly, the today's all the issues have been selected by us. I will deliberate upon them, and at the end of the session, we will also take up the question answers up to the time, whatever time is available to us, and whatever organizations feel the comfortable. I am comfortable. I would also request that, and I'm sure the organizers must have spoken to the participants, must have told them also. Okay, all the questions can be put on the chat box, and then we can take up one after one questions as may be permissible and as may be possible. Out of these 6 topics, except the topic relating to the levy of service tax and GST on the ocean freight, I intend to cover all the topics. Time permitting, I will take up that topic in the last. 2 more topics I have added in my slides. One is relating to the extension of the 9 and 9C, and I am sure that right now that is the only worry on the minds of the participants and across the CA fraternity, whether further extension for filing the 9 and 9C will be granted or not. I will touch upon that, and there is nothing legal interpretation, but I'll touch upon that. There are certain aspects which I would like to highlight about this extension of the 9 and 9C. And the other part is about the time limit under section 16(4) about the within 180 days, the payment which is required to be made. I will try to highlight upon that also. So in that case, proviso to section 16(2), for which 180 days time limit is provided. These are the 2 additional topics which I would like to cover today. Friends, Joni ji, you would like me to speak in both, no? English and Hindi, right?
Yes, sir. It's okay.
English and Hindi both. Okay, English and Gujarati.
Sir, anything you prefer?
No, and when
English and Hindi, sir.
Hindi will be okay. Okay, fine. The first, I think, can you just show the slide, the first slide, please? This is the first topic which we will be taking up. Participants may kindly note that this entire presentation in PDF form will be circulated to all of you by the branch once the session is over. So branch will take it up and they will take care of that sending to everybody. So there is no need to take any photographs or anything. This will be with you today, tomorrow, as per the branch convenience. The first topic which we would be taking up is refund under inverted tax structure, statutory provisions, issues, and the implications of the recent High Court judgments. Next. Friends, you are aware that Section 54 is a comprehensive integrated code for the refund under GST. Today, the text of the Section 54, I think there are some disturbance. If the participants can mute their audio, please. Yeah. So Section 54 deals with the refund arising under GST of the tax or interest or penalty or any other amount, including the accumulated ITC. And it is a complete code by itself. This is the text of the Section 54. To the extent it is relevant for today's discussion, we will be concentrating on subsection 3 for the today's purpose. Next. The machinery provisions for the claiming the refund are provided under Rule 89 and Rule 96. Both are dealing with the different situations, as we will see it in a minute. Next. If you carefully see Section 54, two things come to the notice. You would find that Section 54 subsection 1 deals with the refund of tax, interest, etc. And Section 54 subsection 3 provides for the refund of the unutilized ITC. Please bear it in mind that Section 54 subsection 1 does not deal with the unutilized ITC refund. For that, one has to go to 54.3 only. 54.1 does not deal with the refund of the ITC. It provides for the refund of the tax, interest, or any other amount paid, like late fee or penalty or whatever. For whatever reason, the refund might be arising. What is also important to note is that Section 54 is an integrated comprehensive code for the refund of the GST. वो एक स्वयं पर्याप्त सेल्फ सफिशिएंट कंप्लीट कोड है रिफंड के लिए. You do not have to look for anything else except transitional provision section 140 and 142. The other provision, section 54, is the paramount provision for the refund. And it is mostly structured, mainly it is structured on the basis of section 11B of the Central Excise Act. If you compare them, you will find that by and large, section 54 is patterned on section 11B only. And since provisions of section 11B were also made applicable to service tax by section 83 of the Finance Act, the same logic will apply. What is important to note here is this: any disputes arising under section 54 for refund purpose in any manner, probably one may have to go back to the old regime and see the judgments ratio applicability, the judgments which have been delivered in the context of refund under section 11B, Central Excise, whether those judgments will be applicable or not, one has to see. Most of the time, the ratio laid down in those judgments will continue to apply even under section 54 refund also whenever any dispute arises. So do not discard the old regime. There is no need to ignore. आपको जो एक्साइज और सर्विस टैक्स में रिफंड में जो जजमेंट्स पास हुए हैं कोई भी डिस्प्यूट पे, जैसे रिफंड रिजेक्ट करने से पहले सो कॉज नोटिस जरूरी है कि नहीं, तो ये जो सारे जजमेंट्स है, वो सारे जजमेंट टेक्निकल वायोलेशन विसाविस द सब्सटेंशियल कंप्लायंस, वेदर रिफंड कैन बी रिजेक्टेड और नॉट, तो ऐसे काफी सारे जो डिस्प्यूट है वो डिस्प्यूट पे एक्साइज और सर्विस टैक्स में वो जो जजमेंट्स जो सारे जो डिलीवर हुए हैं, अनजस्ट एनरिचमेंट हो या लिमिटेशन हो, तो ये सारे जजमेंट सेक्शन 50 कोर के तहत अगर आप रिफंड क्लेम करते हो तो उसमें भी उसके सिद्धांत लागू हो सकते हैं। ये बात आपको याद रखनी है। कमिंग टू रूल 89 एंड 96, जैसे मैंने आपको बताया कि सेक्शन 54 सब सेक्शन 1 में जो सिर्फ टैक्स इंटरेस्ट पेनल्टी या अतिरिक्त कोई अमाउंट का रिफंड आप क्लेम कर सकते हो, उसी तरह से सेक्शन 54 सब सेक्शन 3 में आप अनयूटिलाइज्ड इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट का रिफंड क्लेम कर सकते हो। अब तो इसकी जो मशीनरी प्रोविजंस है, लेइंग डाउन द फॉर्म एंड द मैनर इन विच द रिफंड कैन बी क्लेम्ड, तो ये मशीनरी प्रोविजंस सेक्शन 54(1) के तहत जो रिफंड क्लेम किया जाता है उसको रूल 89 के अंदर आपको देखना है। और रूल 96 जो है, दैट रूल 96 डील्स विद द रिफंड ऑफ टैक्स पेड ऑन द एक्सपोर्ट्स ऑन पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स। अगर एक्सपोर्ट्स हो रहा है ऑन अंडर बॉन्ड और एलयूटी विदाउट पेमेंट ऑफ टैक्स, तो उसके रिफंड के प्रोविजन सेक्शन रूल 89 में है। इसी तरह से आईटीसी यूटिलाइज अनयूटिलाइज आईटीसी टैक्स पेनल्टी इंटरेस्ट, उसकी जो रिफंड की जो जो सारी मशीनरी है वो रूल 89 के अंतर्गत दी गई है। और रूल 96 जो है दैट इज ओनली फॉर द रिफंड ऑफ द टैक्स पेड ऑन एक्सपोर्ट्स ऑन पेमेंट क्लियर मेड ऑन एक्सपोर्ट्स। तो ये डिस्टिंक्शन आपको याद रखना है। कमिंग टू नाउ सेक्शन 54(3), ये जो डिस्प्यूट जो है वो डिस्प्यूट अगर हम पहले समझ ले कि सेक्शन अनयूटिलाइज आईटीसी, ये जो पूरी डिस्प्यूट अभी जो हम जो जिसके बारे में अभी हम चर्चा करेंगे वो सिर्फ एक ही इश्यू पे हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं कि वेदर जहां पे इन्वर्टेड टैक्स स्ट्रक्चर अगर हो और वो इन्वर्टेड टैक्स स्ट्रक्चर के अंतर्गत मुझे मेरी आउटपुट टैक्स लायबिलिटी अगर मेरे इनवर्ड सप्लाईज पे जो मैं टैक्स भर रहा हूं जिसकी मैं क्रेडिट ले रहा हूं, if my outward tax liability is lower than my input tax credit which I am availing on the inputs and input services, can I claim the refund of the tax on which credit which I have taken on inputs as well as the tax I have taken on input services both? This is the dispute. जहां तक इनपुट का सवाल है, देयर इज एब्सोल्युटली नो प्रॉब्लम। इन्वर्टेड टैक्स स्ट्रक्चर के अंतर्गत आप इनपुट का भी, इनपुट पे जो टैक्स आपने जो भुगतान किया है करदाता ने, उसकी आईटीसी भी आप उसका रिफंड क्लेम कर सकते हो। परंतु इनपुट सर्विसेज पे यह रिफंड मिले अंदर रूल 89(5), दैट इज द रिलेवेंट रूल। रूल 89(5) के अंतर्गत मुझे इनपुट सर्विसेज पे जो मैंने टैक्स की भुगतान की है जिसके विच आई एम टेकिंग द आईटीसी, कैन आई क्लेम द रिफंड ऑफ दैट आईटीसी ऑन इनपुट सर्विसेज अंडर रूल 89(5) व्हेन माय प्रोडक्ट सफर द इन्वर्टेड टैक्स स्ट्रक्चर? दिस इज द क्वेश्चन। यह एक प्रश्न है जिसके बारे में हम आज अभी हम चर्चा कर रहे हैं। कैन यू go back to the 54(3) slide, third slide. Third. Next, previous one. Yes. Now, मित्रों, अभी अगर आप देखेंगे तो सेक्शन 54 सबसेक्शन 3 है, वो कहते हैं कि ए रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन मे क्लेम द रिफंड ऑफ एनी अनयूटिलाइज्ड आईटीसी एट द एंड ऑफ एनी टैक्स पीरियड। यहाँ ये आप इसकी जो जो शुरुआत है ये सबसेक्शन 3 की, दैट इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग। देयर इज a sort of a the general statement, a complete green signal that a registered person may claim refund of any unutilized input tax credit at the end of any tax period. उसके बाद there is a proviso, provided that no refund of unutilized input tax credit shall be granted in cases other than 1, zero rated supplies made without payment of tax, and 2, where the credit has accumulated on account of rate of tax on inputs being higher than the rate of tax on output supplies. We will stop here. Now come to slide number 6. Sorry, previous slide. Yes. So if you see now, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल सेक्शन 54(3) में एनी अनयूटिलाइज आईटीसी का रिफंड करदाता को मिल सकता है, the taxpayer can get, that is the provision has been met. This is the blanket provision. However, a proviso has been inserted. That proviso says, that proviso which is a part of section 54(3) restricts the grant of refund of any accumulated ITC only in two situations. One, when there is a zero rated supply without payment of tax. It means that when there is a zero rated supply under LUT or bond, then only you will get. And second situation is when there is a accumulated ITC on account of inverted tax structure. So though the opening part of the section 54(3) allows the refund of unutilized ITC of any nature, the proviso restricts the applicability only in two cases. One, zero rated supplies under LUT, and two, when the ITC has accumulated on account of inverted tax structure. और आपको पता है कि inverted tax structure is that tax structure के where the output tax liability on my final activity, whether supply of goods or whether supply of service, is lesser than my input tax credit which I am availing on the input and input services. That is generally results into the inverted tax structure where I am paying lesser tax on my final activity. Coming to the refund under inverted tax structure, सबसे पहले we should remember that till GST came into operation, inverted tax structure के अंतर्गत accumulated sandwich credit की refund मिलने की देने की कोई भी व्यवस्था कभी भी excise में नहीं थी और service tax में भी नहीं थी. This has been introduced for the first time under GST. No refund was allowed under excise and service tax of the accumulated sandwich credit which was arising on account of the inverted tax structure. Rule 5 of Sandwich Credit Rules 2004 was allowing the refund of the accumulated sandwich credit only on account of the exports under bond and some others, but not because of the inverted tax structure. For the first time, these provisions have been introduced in the indirect tax structure under GST, in the GST regime. This is a very significant fact which should be kept in mind. Next. Now, if we see the proviso, second, clause 2 of the proviso, next. If you see the clause 2 with which we are concerned with today, what it says, ITC accumulated on account of rate of tax on inputs being higher than the rate of tax on output supplies. Output supplies, please mark this word, other than nil rated or fully exempt supplies, except supplies of goods or services or both as may be notified by the central government. So अगर मेरे input पे मेरा rate of tax, if it is higher than the rate of tax on my output supply, because of that, if there may not be any exports, there is a domestic supply. However, because my rate of tax on input is higher than my rate of tax on the output supply, there is an accumulation of the credit which I am unable to utilize. And then this clause 2 of proviso to section 54(3) will come into play, under which I can claim the refund. Now, how to claim the refund? Then Rule 89(5) provides the methodology and formula for claiming the refund. जो फॉर्मूला जो दी गई है, that makes very interesting reading. This formula को मैंने 3 पीरियड में हमें समझना है. The first period is 1st July 2017 to 17 for 2018. Second period is 18 for 2018 to 12 June 2018, and 13 June 2018 से जिसमें retrospective amendment किया गया from 1/7/2017. Now let us see the next slide. Now, if you see the first period 1/7/2017 to 17 for 2018, the formula which we were talking about was the, just go back to the previous slide, please. Previous slide. Previous, पहले वाले, इसके पहले. अच्छा, if you see the formula says maximum refund amount is equal to turnover of inverted supply of goods, inverted supply of goods into net ITC. We will stop that. I'm not going to interpret this formula beyond a limit. Two, the factors should be kept in mind. Turnover of inverted supply of goods and multiplied by net ITC. Next. Now, net ITC again has been defined under subrule 4, and that subrule 4 net ITC, which was defined under the rule 89(5) की बात हम कर रहे हैं, where it was defined so as to mean how it is defined under rule 4 that has been adopted. And rule 4 defines the net ITC as means input tax credit availed on input and input services. This is a definition. Net ITC, ये definition यहाँ पे adopt की गई थी up to 17/4/18. Net ITC means input tax credit availed on input and input services. Prima facie इसका conclusion ये निकलता है कि till 17/4/2018 I was entitled for the refund of accumulated ITC even availed on input services. However, 18/4/2018 को subrule 5 को substitute किया गया, and the formula was also substituted in this manner. Maximum refund amount is equal to turnover of inverted rated supply of goods and services. First formula में, initial formula में turnover में मुझे services का turnover नहीं लेना था. Now I have to include even services turnover. But net ITC has now been separately defined. And how it has been defined? Net ITC shall mean input tax credit availed on inputs. The original definition of net ITC, which was given in subrule 4, जो 17th April 18 तक जो adopt किया गया था, उसमें input and input services both were there. Now it is only on inputs. Now coming to post amendment on 13 June 2018, और ये amendment, friends, has been done retrospectively from 1/7/2017. This has been done retrospectively by notification 21/2018. And in this, it is a formula remains ditto the same. There is no change in the formula. Net ITC also remains the same. So what is the conclusion? Though up to 17/4/2018, net ITC की definition के मुताबिक I was entitled for the refund of the accumulated ITC even on input services. From 18/4, that facility was withdrawn from me because net ITC की definition में से input services को हटाया गया. And after 2 months, the very formula, same formula was given retrospective effect from 1st July 2017, meaning thereby the government legislative intent is not to grant the refund of the accumulated ITC on input services, which is arising on account of inverted tax structure. I'm right. I'm not on zero rated supplies on without payment of tax. That is not the subject today. We are only on inverted tax structure. And please also bear in mind that clause 2 of the proviso, जिसके अंतर्गत ये refund हम claim कर रहे हैं, it always spoke about the rate of tax on input being higher than the rate of tax on output supplies. तो ये दो चीज हमें याद रखनी है कि today the legal position going by the plain meaning is that my section says rate of tax being higher on inputs being higher than the rate of tax on the output supplies, and my formula says net ITC means ITC available on inputs. और एक सहज इसका जो कंक्लूजन निकलता है वो ये है कि अगर say for instance I am a trader or a manufacturer, and if my rate of tax is higher than on input is higher than the rate of tax on my final finished goods which I am selling or manufacturing and selling, in that case I may be entitled for the refund of the accumulated ITC on my input, my procurement of the goods, but not on input services. And that is what the view prevalent amongst the department. This is coming from this entire history. Next. This was challenged before two high courts recently. Two high courts have delivered their final judgment. One is Gujarat High Court in VKC footsteps, and second is Madras High Court in a Alstom case. Madras High Court is on 21st September 2020. They have delivered this judgment. In VKC, the challenge was to non-grant of the refund under Rule 89(5) on the input services. And the High Court has summarized this conclusion in this manner. One, I'm not going into the detailed argument of the challenge. These are the summarized version of the High Court judgment. One, what High Court has held in a very detailed judgment, that explanation denying the refund of unutilized input tax credit on input services is ultra virus section 54(3). This was the first conclusion reached by the High Court. High Court ने ये कहा कि जो explanation जिसमें नेट ITC में से input service का reference हटाया गया है, thereby the refund on the input services is being denied. That explanation is ultra virus section 54(3), because under section 54(3) there cannot be no such prohibition or no such restriction can be read into the section 54(3). That is the High Court conclusion. Second, considering the entire scheme of the thing, High Court said this explanation has to be read down to the extent that the same defines net input tax credit means input tax credit only. Net input tax credit means input tax credit only, means the entire input tax credit. That is the High Court conclusion. Third, net input tax credit means input tax credit availed on input and input services as defined. Four, considering the provisions of the Act and rules, scheme and object of the Act, the intent of the government by framing the rules, restricting the statutory provision cannot be the intent of the law as interpreted by the board in its circular dated 31st/12/2018, whereby the refund on input service was sought to be denied, where the board said a refund of ITC accumulated on input services cannot be given under inverted tax structure. So High Court said, no, this is not flowing from the scheme. This is not flowing from the object of the scheme. This is not flowing from the statutory provisions. And finally, refund of unutilized ITC of input service to be granted as part of net ITC for the purpose of Rule 89. And accordingly, the High Court ordered the refund to be granted of the unutilized ITC even on input services. Next. What was the basis of the judgment? First of all, High Court went into detail in all the statutory provisions and the relevant definitions. Input definition, input tax definition, input tax credit definition, input service definition. And apart from that, High Court went into section 54(3). High Court went into Rule 89(5). All and is amended from time to time. And this was very detailed analysis the High Court did. Second, High Court also went into the first discussion paper, if you would recall, the first discussion paper which had been actually mooted as early as in 2009, and where the justification for GST and as well as the salient features of GST. Third, international VAT and GST guideline. Friends, you may kindly recall that in SENVAT credit, there were dispute about the admissibility of SENVAT credit on certain services. This matter had gone to tribunal in Coca-Cola and thereafter in the High Court. ABB Limited and Coca-Cola India Private Limited are two celebrity judgments which basically explain in a detail what is the SENVAT credit principle all about, what is the nature of SENVAT credit. In those judgments, the international VAT and GST guideline issued by OECD were very referred, and it formed the basis of those judgments. The same international VAT GST guideline issued by the OECD have also been referred by the High Court because it was placed before the High Court by way of the submissions on behalf of the petitioners. High Court also went into the basic principles as outlined into these guidelines. I would actually enjoin upon all of you, these are freely available, these guidelines are freely available in the judgment itself. They are freely available on Google also. Please do go through those guidelines. It will make you, it will help you in understanding what is the overall character of the VAT or GST and how it actually goes. And the third is input tax credit mechanism in GST and plus FAQ. The sum and substance of the High Court judgment is this, that statement of objects and reasons governing the bill, the bill by which the GST was introduced in the parliament, plus overall objective of the GST scheme is to avoid the cascading effect of tax. And if this central objective of the GST should, if kept in mind, there is absolutely no reason that why the refund of the accumulated credit on input services should be disallowed, because then it flies flat on the very objective of the scheme, that GST is intended primarily, fundamentally, basically to actually avoid the cascading effect of tax. And this is how the High Court actually framed and came to the conclusion that this denial, which otherwise is not flowing from the section, is otherwise also not in keeping with the overall objective and scheme of the GST scheme. It is important to note that after having concluded that Rule 89.5 is ultra-virus, High Court has not struck down the rule. They have read down. I'm not going into this, what is meant by the concept of reading down, because we don't have time for that. But you might recall that in Safari Retreat also, while granting allowing the credit on the construction material for the mall or for the resort which are to be leased out, the Orissa High Court has also read down that provision in the context of Section 17(5)(d). Similarly, in brand equity also, Delhi High Court has read down the requirement relating to the time limit and the provision while allowing the TAN 1 to be filed belatedly also. Similarly, here the Gujarat High Court has done. Now comes the Madras High Court judgment. Next. Madras High Court unfortunately did not subscribe to the view of the Gujarat High Court, and in a detailed judgment again, Madras High Court said first Rule 89.5 is intra-virus Section 54(3), and on the various aspects, friends, I'm not going into detail. I have actually summarized under each heading what the Madras High Court actually held. There was a constitutional challenge to Section 54(3). High Court says Section 54(3)(2), that is proviso, is valid and constitutional. Rule 89.5 is not ultra-virus Section 54(3). Next. Refund of unutilized ITC is not an exemption, it is not an incentive, it is not a rebate, it is not a discount or abatement, but it is in the nature of benefit or concession. Because it is in the nature of benefit or concession, unless statutorily it is allowed to be given, it cannot be claimed as a vested right. Friends, you will recall the same conclusion has been reached by the Madras High Court in RS Money case, where they have relied upon the Supreme Court judgment in Jayam and Company and another judgment in the ALD Automotive, that credit or set-off is a benefit or concession and it is not a vested right. This issue has now actually is one of the major issues which would be found in brand equity case. So whether it is a vested right or not, that we will have to see. The other conclusion, there was a challenge to the classification that there is basically a arbitrary and unreasonable classification whereby the refund on the input services is not being allowed under inverted tax structure. High Court says that in the matter of fiscal or tax legislation, legislature has got a great leeway whereby they can create the class, and this class, the way the classification has been done, does not actually make it arbitrary or unreasonable. Next. And the basis of the High Court observation was that goods and services have always been treated differently since the time immemorial. Therefore, this classification is nothing wrong with this classification. Now, so we are now in the quandary. With all these views, High Court said that we are unable to subscribe to the view of the Gujarat High Court in VKC footsteps. So we have two diametrically conflicting judgments today, one by Gujarat High Court, which says that refund of the accumulated ITC on input services cannot be denied, and Madras High Court says that such denial is valid and legal and proper. Where do we go between two conflicting judgments? Before I deal with that, friends, let me observe certain things. There are conflicting views, no doubt. Which view shall prevail? Before we take a some before we deliberate on this, okay, which view seems to be more reasonable, proper, and plausible. There are certain aspects of both the judgments. Gujarat High Court judgment, one peculiar aspect is this: that High Court has not struck down Rule 89.5, even though it declared it as a ultra virus Section 54.3. They only read down it. One. Madras High Court, when the argument on reading down was placed before it, in the last paragraph, Honorable Madras High Court said, okay, we are not going into this argument on the reading down. We will wait for some appropriate clause. They have said, and casus emissus, whether if there is missing in law, whether it should be supplied by the court or not, they said, no, that also we will wait for the appropriate stage. Another noteworthy aspect of this judgment of Madras High Court is that there are no conclusive reasoning forthcoming in the Madras High Court judgment, for which they are not agreeing with the Gujarat High Court judgment. Entire judgment does not give any specific reasons why they are not agreeing with the Gujarat High Court judgment. Now, my personal views on this entire controversy are: one, if the legislature wants to deny the credit on input services, accumulated ITC under inverted structure, it is the legislative prerogative. One may not be able to question that. However, as I read Section 54.3, Clause 2, Proviso Clause 2, my personal view is this: that language of that Clause 2 to Proviso does not reflect the legislative intent of denying the refund on the accumulated ITC on input service. It is legislative has a discretionary power. They have got a prerogative, fine, but that should percolate it down. That should be embodied in the language of the statutory provision. If you very carefully read the Clause 2 of the Proviso of Section 54.3, this is not forthcoming that input service pay ITC accumulated cannot be given, refund cannot be given. That is not coming down. Second, a very significant expression used in that clause is output supplies. Can output supplies be restricted only to goods? In my humble opinion, the answer is no. There is nothing in that Section 54.3, that particular clause, which debars the supplier of the services to claim the refund per se, even of the accumulated ITC, if their services, the rate of tax on their services is lesser than the rate of tax, suppose, on the input. For instance, suppose a service provider is paying the tax at 5%, but on his input, the rate of tax is 12%. Can he not claim the refund? I'm not talking about input service. He is using the goods also, let us assume. Now, can he not claim the refund under inverted tax structure? He certainly can claim the refund. And that's why, if you very carefully see notification, exemption notification 13/2017, and also the exemption notification, there are certain notification where the concessional rate of the tax or exemption has been provided, 5% or 12% has been provided with a specific condition that no refund of accumulated ITC shall be allowed. If the service providers were not allowed to take the refund per se under Section 54.3, then such condition was not required to be mentioned at all. So service providers are not barred from claiming refund per se. Output supplies would cover not only the supplies of goods, but supplies of services also. Unfortunately, the Honorable Madras High Court did not dwell upon detail the significance of the term output supplies in its judgment. The next is the Section 54.3 and 89.5. I would say that Rule 89.5, the very validity can be subject matter of a challenge, because Section 54.3 does not even provide for any such prescription by the rule at all, unlike Section 54.1. Section 54.1 says refund of tax, interest, penalty, etc. Now, Section 54.1 also says that this refund should be claimed in the form and manner as may be prescribed. If you read carefully Section 54.1, it is at the end, it is mentioned in the form or manner as may be prescribed. However, Section 54(3), which allows the refund of the accumulated ITC under two circumstances. One, zero-rated exports without payment of tax, and under inverted tax structure, does not say in the manner and form as may be prescribed. And therefore, whether Rule 89(5) itself can be challenged, can the power to issue Rule 89(5) be traced to Section 164? That is another question which probably may come to the light in the coming days, because this is a more or less similar question which has been gone into in the Tran 1 related cases, if you read all the High Court judgments very carefully. And importantly, if you see the two formula on 13/6/2018, the 18/4/2018, 18/4/2018, Subrule 5, which was substituted, then thereafter on 13 June 2018, again Subrule 5 was substituted with retrospective effect. Friends, very carefully, if you see, there is absolutely no difference between these two substitutions. One done in April 18 and another done in June 18. There is absolutely no difference, not even of the comma. That being the case, why the substitution was done in June 18? My personal feeling, my personal view is this was done simpliciter to give the substituted Rule 5, which was substituted in April 18. It could not have been given directly the retrospective effect. Therefore, the retrospective effect was given in June 18 in the mode of substitution. Whether it is a substitution or whether it is a subterfuge, that is something one will have to answer. Because by substituting Subrule 5, you are substituting the earlier substituted rule only. And this may become, whether under delegated legislation, this can be done or not. Having said all this, these are my personal views. So sum and substance of my view is on this, that as on date, the way the Section 54(3) proviso clause 2 stands, vis-a-vis Rule 89(5), the very validity keeping it in mind, whether the substituted Rule 89(5) is retrospective amendment, and considering the overall objective and scheme of the scheme, the denial of the ITC refund on the accumulated ITC refund on the input services does not seem to be passing the muster of the law. It cannot be held to be proper and valid. The refund is available. That is what my personal view is. And because it flies flat against in the face of the cascading effect tax, this is a central objective. VAT or GST is actually operated through the invoice credit mechanism. And in the invoice credit mechanism, when the output tax liability is lesser than the input tax credit available to the taxpayer, theoretically, principally, and technically, the taxpayer is entitled for the refund. However, that refund cannot be given to him, to each and every taxpayer every month or at the end of the tax period. It will be unviable, it will be impractical, it will not be possible. And that's why the taxpayer is allowed to carry forward that ITC forever, which he has legally earned and which he can utilize at any point of time. And then there is no one-to-one correlation also. Why? Because otherwise the government will be forced to give the refund at every end of the tax period to the taxpayer, particularly when there is inverted tax structure. First of all, inverted tax structure should not have the place under GST regime, because the GST is basically a value-added consumption tax. Value-added tax charged on the consumption of the goods and services. Inverted tax structure cannot have the place at all. But if the inverted tax structure is there, so merely because the refund taxpayer is allowed to carry forward the credit, if he is unable to utilize this credit, he cannot be denied the refund on input or input services. That is the fundamental principle governing the VAT or GST. Unfortunately, the Honorable Madras High Court has not gone into any of these aspects. So my personal view is this, that the views expressed by the Gujarat High Court seem to be more plausible, more reasonable, and more pragmatic, keeping with the overall GST regime and the philosophy governing GST. And now what? There are two High Court judgments which is binding. As per the binding principle of the High Court judgment, Gujarat High Court judgment is binding on the SSCs and the departmental authorities in Gujarat, across the Gujarat, till the time the High Court judgment is stayed by the Supreme Court. It is binding on the taxpayers can take the benefit of that judgment departmental authorities are bound to give the effect to that judgment. Similarly, Tamil Nadu taxpayers and department are bound by the Tamil Nadu High Court judgment. If there is any other High Court where again same issue is found, it is for that Honorable High Court to take either the Gujarat High Court line or the Madras High Court line, or High Court can take its own view and the matter can go to Supreme Court also. But as the matter stands today, the Gujarat High Court judgment is binding on all the SSCs situated in Gujarat. I mean, they can take the benefit and it is binding on the department in the Gujarat. So I would personally feel that those who have not been able to claim the refund on the input services based on this Gujarat High Court judgment, they can file the refund claim. If the GSTN does not accept the refund claim technically for any reason, the refund claim can be filed manually also. So this sums up my first discussion on the first topic. Next. Coming to the another equally contentious issue of levy of interest under Section 50 of the CGST Act. Next. These are the provisions, friends. So we will not go through these provisions. More or less, we are all aware of this. Next. If you see, the provisions for the recovery of interest are under Section 50. And Section 50 has two parts. One is Section 50 subsection 1, which provides for the levy of interest on the delayed payment of tax. And two, Section 50 subsection 3, which provides for the levy of interest on the undue or excess input tax credit arising on account of the mismatch under Rule 42 and Section 42 and 43. So 50 subsection 3 deals with the levy of interest in case of ITC, which is unduly availed or availed in excess, whereas Section 50 subsection 1 deals with the levy of interest on the account of delayed payment of tax. The issue which has arisen was whether interest to be levied on the gross amount of tax or net amount of tax paid in cash after considering and adjusting debiting the available ITC. When there is a delayed payment of tax, friends, you are all aware, the taxpayer, just like the previous Senvet credit scheme, taxpayers were actually are under GST regime can also discharge the tax liability either by a debit through the input tax credit ledger account, or in case if the ITC is not available, or partly in ITC and partly in cash. That goes on. The question arises when there is a delayed payment of tax, and whether the interest should be charged on the gross amount of tax or whether it should be charged on the net amount of tax after adjusting and considering the input tax credit which is available with the taxpayer. This issue became important. This issue arose and the demands actually started flying around across the country immediately in the initial year of the GST only. Somewhere in 2018 it started. And department was saying, okay, once there is a delayed payment of tax, even if you adjust it through the ITC or you had a ITC available on the penultimate day earlier, which you would have debited, you are still liable to pay the interest on the entire amount. Now, the problem with GST is this: everything is online. And therefore, because GSTN is the supreme authority, GSTN is above all practically. Therefore, when a taxpayer is having the input tax credit balance also at the end of the tax period, but not sufficient to meet his output tax liability, he cannot debit the part amount in the ITC, keeping because he does not have the sufficient cash to make the balance payment. He cannot do this because GSTN will not accept that. Though the law does not provide for the full payment of tax, partial liability can be discharged, but the system will not operate, system will not allow. That being the case, though the ITC portion can also not be debited and it remains on the books of account. And here the department started issuing the demand notices. This led to the GST Council meeting in December 2018. Council took note of this fact, and Council, because there was a lot of protest and uproar over this stand of the department, so the Council decided, no, we will charge you the interest only on the net tax amount after adjusting or debiting the ITC. This was a December 18 meeting. However, in the meantime, Telangana High Court, that mega engineering judgment came, and mega engineering case, Telangana High Court said that unless and until the debit is made in the input tax credit ledger account, the everything is remain on paper, or in the High Court words, it remains in the cloud. The money does not come to the coffer of the government, and therefore it cannot be said to have been paid, and therefore interest is liable to be paid on the gross amount. That is what the Telangana High Court came. This came as a shot in the arm for the departmental authorities who have been demanding the interest on the entire gross amount. Next. Now, pursuant to the December 18 GST Council meeting decision recommendation, this proviso was inserted in section 50 subsection 1 by the Finance number 2 Act 2019. And what it says, that proviso is before you, so I will not read it. The sum and substance of this proviso is this: whenever there is a delayed payment of tax, the interest will be recovered from the taxpayer only on the net tax amount, with after adjusting or debiting the input tax credit available to him. This is the proviso in keeping with the recommendations of the ITC GST Council. I'm not going into the interpretation of this proviso. I am personally absolutely upset and unhappy with this proviso. It is extremely badly and dangerously worded, but that is a different matter altogether. Now, this proviso was never given effect because it did not come into force immediately, though the Finance Act was passed in August 2019. It was never given, it could not be given effect, and it without giving effect, it could not have become the force. It could not have become operative. It remained on paper. It remained inserted in section 50, subsection 1, but without actually having any life of its own. It was not live. It remained on paper. Why? Because unless it is notified as per the section 1, subsection 2 of the Finance Act, it could not have come into force. Now, there are some reasons why it did not come into force immediately. Government did not notify it immediately. One of the reasons is this, that two of the states had not been able to pass the similar amendment in their respective state act. That is one of the reasons. Another reason I am not going into. Now, the amendment was ultimately, in the meantime, interestingly, Madras High Court in Reflex Industries case, single judge judgment came. And though the amendment, the proviso had not become effective, the Honorable High Court went on deciding the matter and saying that, holding that this amendment is clarificatory and retrospective in nature. Mind you, the proviso had not come into effect. Still, the Honorable High Court single judge discussed this entire proviso, the legal scheme of the things, and the objective behind the proviso, and held it to be clarificatory and retrospective. Now, this judgment came as a single judge judgment. On the other side, the department argument went on. The department contention remained the same. They went on the rampage. They started recovering through garnishee provision. They started recovering through the demand notices. They started recovering through the debtors, writing to the bank, attaching the bank account and all. This whole thing went on continuously. Next. Now, what happened was that notification, ultimately the government notified the proviso and put it into effect by notification 63 by 2020. And against all expectations, the notification actually made the proviso effective prospectively from 1st of September. And that being the case, suddenly there was a complete disappointment and disbelief across the country, because taxpayers and tax professionals all were expecting that this would be actually made effective retrospectively. That was their expectation. Why? Because after December 18 meeting, in March 19 meeting, the GST Council had taken the call and announced that this amendment would be made effective retrospectively. And therefore, nobody believed that there was a sort of a, going back on the promise. Why it was not done retrospectively through the notification? Again, I'm not going into that. Suffice to say that central government by notification could not have made this proviso effective retrospectively. This proviso, which was introduced in the law through the Finance Number 2 Act 2019 could not have been given retrospective effect legally by the central government, or probably they didn't want to take a chance to give it retrospective effect because it could have opened up some unnecessarily legal issues. So to that extent, but people were totally disappointed. Everybody was disappointed. And because of this, again, the demand continued to be flowing around. Recovery continued to be made by the departmental authorities by saying that okay, this is now effective from 1st September, and therefore your past demand, you are liable to pay the tax on the gross amount. This prompted the Central Board of Excise, the Indirect Tax and Customs, CBIC, to step in, and by administrative instruction on 17th September, the board issued this administrative instruction clarifying three parts. One, retrospective amendment will be carried out. One, and I'm expecting either through a separate taxation laws amendment bill, but most probably through the next budget finance bill, it will be carried out in retrospective effect, and this proviso will be given effect from the 1st July 2017. That is for sure. That is now written on the wall. There is nothing, no going back on this. So therefore, this will be given effect mostly through the finance bill when the budget will be introduced. Two, no recovery of the interest on the gross amount for the period between 1st July 17 and 31st August 20. This is very important. Board has very clearly said that wherever the demands have been raised on the gross amount, no recovery will be made or shall be made by the field formations for the past period. And wherever the SOCOS notices have been issued, it may be transferred to the call book. Some of you might be aware about call book. I call it as a, the black hole of the government administrative setup. Whenever the department is pending, some issues are pending before the higher appellate forum, like tribunal or commissioner appeal or even Supreme Court or High Court, on the same issue, the SOCOS notices which are issued to the taxpayer are kept in the call book and pending. So SOCOS notices, board says, okay, you transfer it to the call book and do not adjudicate upon it. So a question of recovery does not arise. While this came as a great relief to the taxpayers, in the meantime, friends, on 29 September, in Mansarovar Motors case, Madras High Court single judge who has already passed the reflex judgment, though bit prematurely, I would say, has already passed the order and saying that levying interest on only ITC portion is cost. Refund of the interest which has been already recovered is ordered to be refund. Refund is ordered of the interest which has already been recovered on the gross amount, that is on the ITC portion, where the petitioners were compelled to make the payment, even on the ITC payment. High Court has ordered the refund of that. And further, even for the recovery of interest on the case portion, the department has to follow the due process of law, that is notice under section 73 or section 74. In my opinion, section 74 really should not come into picture at this stage of the things. Section 73, they cannot simply sit or recover the interest even on the case portion. That is what and that is exactly the fundamental legal position. Supreme Court Madhumilan Syntax, Supreme Court Gokak Patel, these are all the judgments where it says that mere demand is not a show cause notice. There has to be a show cause notice for making any recovery of any amount from the taxpayer. And though this is the only pronounced in the court, so far the judgment is not out, the text is not out, the judgment is not issued yet. We are awaiting it. But as we understand, there were extensive arguments on the retrospective effect of this proviso now, which has now become now effective. And we understand that High Court has probably given favorable ruling even on that aspect, holding it to be retrospective already. So we are awaiting that judgment. So under this scenario, what should be the way forward for the taxpayers who have been forced to actually pay the tax, pay the interest on the entire amount? In my opinion, if the section 54 time limit of 2 years is available, those taxpayers who have been compelled to pay the tax even on the ITC portion should file the refund claim immediately. If there is any difficulty on filing anything on GSTN, please file it manually. Don't bother about it. One can file it manually. Two, those where the time limit is already gone, still based on all this legal development, one should file the refund claim, have the rejection order, and then it can definitely be challenged by way of a writ petition. if the time limit is already gone. But my personal feeling is that when the finance bill will make this proviso retrospective, there would also be a provision for claiming the refund within certain stipulated period. Normally 6 months is given for claiming the refund of the tax paid on the ITC portion. And therefore, it will be worth its while to keep the entire issue alive, your right to claim the refund alive. It would be very, very essential. So this is the as far as this interest controversy is concerned. And on the sideline, let me say also, the rampant action of attachment of the bank accounts or the blocking certain facilities, writing to the debtors, asking them and recovering money from the debtors of the taxpayer under garnishee provision, not only of interest, but even of any other tax amount without following the due process of law, without actually first determining the amount payable as per law through the process of issue of the so-called notice is wholly illegal and without jurisdiction. And therefore, such action should not be tolerated, cannot be accepted as per the law, and should be challenged as known in the matter. One should know there is no need to get worried about this. There cannot be every letter, every demand, by mere demand letter, they cannot ask for the amount to be paid. And having said, I will only sum up by saying one more thing on this, and that, in my opinion, personally, even interest on the case portion also cannot be demanded today, even though there is a delayed payment of tax, because Section 54(1), there is a machinery provisions are not existing, whereby I can determine the due date from which I have to determine the interest. Obviously, for computing the interest liability, I need two dates. One is due date on which I ought to have discharged my liability, and another is the date of payment. These two dates are unless determinable, my interest liability cannot be determined. In my opinion, probably Section 50 subsection 1 is missing on this point, read with the relevant rules. Today, it is cannot be made operative in this manner. Therefore, even the liability to claim, recover the interest even on the cash portion can also be a subject matter of dispute. Next. Coming to the precondition of availment of ITC. Again, a very heart-burning issue, and which will see more and more fireworks in the coming days, friends. Next. As you know, there are 4 conditions for taking the ITC as prescribed under Section 16. These 4 conditions are: 1, the goods or services should have been received by the taxpayer. 2, that he is in the possession of the tax invoice or debit note, he has received the goods or services, or both. And 3, next. Subject to the provisions, the tax charge in respect of such supply has been actually paid to the government, either in case or through utilization of input tax credit admissible in respect of the said supply. And 4, he has furnished the return under Section 39. First 2 conditions are quite simple, that taxpayer should have received the goods or services, that is his input procurement on which he is claiming the credit, and he should be in the possession of the valid tax invoice. There is no difficulty. This is more or less the similar view, similar coming from the Senvet credit and the earlier Modvet days. The third condition is that the supplier should have discharged the tax liability either in case or through ITC in respect of the supply made to the taxpayer, recipient taxpayer. We will be discussing about this third condition. And the fourth is he has furnished the return under Section 39. Friends, please, I will clarify one. Here the word he, expression he here, it does not refer to the vendor. He here refers to the recipient taxpayer. So do not make any mistake. If you read the entire 4 clause A, B, C, D in a conjoined manner and carefully, the word he here describes the recipient taxpayer and not the vendor. As far as the vendor or supplier is concerned, the only condition सिर्फ एक ही शर्त वहां पे संबंधित है, वो क्लोज सी की शर्त कि ही शुड हैव पेड द मनी टैक्स टू द गवर्नमेंट. बट फोर्थ कंडीशन जो है, चौथी जो शर्त है कि उनको सेक्शन 39 में रिटर्न फाइल किया हुआ, दैट अप्लाइज टू द रिसिपिएंट टैक्स पेयर एंड नॉट टू द the vendor taxpayer. There is some confusion. This is my personal view. Next. Now, the problem with this section 16(2)(c), that one of the condition about supplier failure to pay tax will result into the denial of the ITC to the recipient buyer. First of all, let me clarify, no such condition, and most of you will be aware also, no such condition ever existed under excise or service tax under Senvet credit rules. There was no such condition at any time, not even in the passing government had ever introduced such condition under excise and service tax. This whole controversial provision is the legacy from the VAT regime. Most of the स्टेट के राज्य के जो वेट के जो अधिनियम थे उसमें यह कंडीशन थी कि अगर सप्लायर ने टैक्स अगर नहीं भरा है, भुगतान नहीं किया है, तो बायर को क्रेडिट नहीं मिलेगी, सेट ऑफ नहीं मिलेगा. Mainly this all problem had started because of the bogus billing and the disappearing, the vanishing dealers, as I would call it. Because of them, from the Bombay High Court in Mahalakshmi's case, matter went to Supreme Court. And thereafter, this became the part of all the state VAT legislation. कि जहाँ पे डीलर अगर डिफॉल्ट में है या तो डीलर अगर फ्रॉड है तो भी ये बायर अगर जेन्युइन है तो भी बायर विल नॉट गेट द बेनिफिट ऑफ द सेट ऑफ और इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट. और दिस प्रोविजन एट द इंसिस्टेंस ऑफ द स्टेट्स ओनली द यूनियन हैड टू इंट्रोड्यूस अंडर द GST. Otherwise, union probably, as I understand, central government and the board were not happy with introduction this provision in the law. But there was an insistence on part of the states that we want this type of provision also. And now this has created a problem everywhere. The first is, you see, in the COVID-19 era particularly, this condition can have serious implications, particularly for the MSME units. For instance, अगर रजिस्टर्ड टैक्स पेयर कोई, मान लो MSME कोई भी है, दिस विल अप्लाई टू एवरीबडी. आई एम जस्ट गिविंग द MSME बिकॉज दे माइट बी मच मोर एट द रिसीविंग एंड ऑफ दिस टाइप ऑफ कंडीशन. अगर रजिस्टर्ड टैक्स पेयर जो रिसिपिएंट है, जो बायर है, जिन्होंने इनपुट या इनपुट सर्विस खरीदी है, जिसके ऊपर लीगली ही इज एंटाइटल्ड टू द टैक्स क्रेडिट, उसने उनका पेमेंट भी किया है अपने सप्लायर को, मान लो, बट अगर सप्लायर ने पे नहीं किया टैक्स तो ही विल लूज द क्रेडिट, द बायर. अगर सप्लायर ने फेल्स टू पे, द बायर, जो MSME के ज्यादातर वो सप्लाई करते हैं लार्ज बिजनेस यूनिट को, तो लार्ज बिजनेस यूनिट will lose the credit, which probably will discourage them from undertaking any more businesses with such a defaulting taxpayer. COVID-19 में MSME are in a extremely bad condition. They may have their own problems in making the payment because of the cash liquidity, not because they want to defraud the government. But still, this will be the repercussions. Similarly, so चाहे liquidity problem हो, चाहे unit close हो गया हो, चाहे बैंक्रप्सी प्रोसीडिंग चालू हो, या कोई भी रीजन हो, अगर कोई रजिस्टर्ड टैक्स पेयर जेन्युइन रीजन से भी अगर टैक्स की भुगतान नहीं कर रहा है, देन उन्होंने जो माल सप्लाई किया है या सर्विसेज सप्लाई की है टू द बायर, द बायर्स में टेंड टू लूज द क्रेडिट. एंड शायद दिस इन द कमिंग डेज, इन अनदर 2-3 years, 4 years, in the coming days, as I would say, this problem is going to surface like anything. That is what my apprehension is. Next. Having said this, let us now look into whether this provision is constitutionally valid or not. And in the earlier VAT regime, a similar type of provision has been challenged in number of cases before different high courts. This is the complete, more or less, the majority of the cases which I have cited here. And in all these cases, the high courts have clearly taken a view that a buyer cannot be actually do something which is impossible. A buyer cannot be done to, no law never compels anybody to do the impossible. It is impossible for the buyer to ascertain and ensure that the supplier or vendor will actually comply with the law. वो उसके हाथ पकड़कर उसके पास से टैक्स भुगतान नहीं करवा सकता है. उसके he has no means to know whether the buyer will be the supplier will pay the tax or not, is paying the tax or not, whether he is correctly paying the tax or not. So he cannot, and therefore a genuine bona fide buyer cannot be disallowed the credit merely because there is a defaulting supplier, or even if there is a fraudulent, the supplier is a fraud. This is in general, this one of the important judgment on this is that of the Genulal Balchand, Jharkhand Wet High Court judgment. That is very important judgment on this issue. Now, having said this, there are interesting cases of the ECJ, European Court of Justice, which I have cited. A similar issue had arisen and have been arising even under the international VAT regime. Friends, let me say one thing. VAT or GST, as some countries call it GST, some countries call it VAT. VAT or GST is basically operating through the invoice credit method, is a very, very fraud prone tax. काफी फ्रॉड होने की संभावना इसमें रहती है, और हम देख रहे हैं एवरी डे bogus billing is one of the major fraud committed. Carousel fraud happens. Vanishing dealers, as it is known as. These are all the frauds. It is not only happening in India. These are happening across the world in majority of the countries, 190 and more odd countries who have adopted the VAT. Every developed countries is also facing to some extent or other the serious problem of frauds under VAT. So कौवे सब जगह काले ही होते हैं. So it is not restricted only to India. Now, under these circumstances, the question arises that if the seller is the fraud, because of that, whether buyer can be denied the credit or not. And European Court of Justice, the equivocal view, a consistent view has been that unless and until buyer's involvement or complicity in the fraud being committed by the supplier, seller, or vendor is established, buyer cannot be denied the credit merely because the supplier has not paid or defrauded the government. अगर बायर की, खरीदार की, खुद की इन्वॉल्वमेंट, जो वेंडर या सप्लायर जो फ्रॉड कर रहा है, मान लो बोगस बिलिंग कर रहा है, उसमें अगर उसमें खरीदार का या बायर का इन्वॉल्वमेंट अगर साबित नहीं होता है, तो मियरली बिकॉज सप्लायर इज फ्रॉड और सप्लायर ने टैक्स की भुगतान नहीं की है, फॉर दैट रीजन बायर को क्रेडिट डिनाई नहीं की जा सकती है. यह एक कंसिस्टेंट व्यू हम यहाँ पे यूरोपियन कोर्ट ऑफ जस्टिस ने लिया हुआ है, और यही व्यू बाय एंड लार्ज दिस वेरी व्यू हैज बीन in one way or another has been accepted and expressed in all the previous judgments of the different high courts in India also. And personally, next piece. So personally, my view is this. Next. Next. So personally, my view in the earlier one is this, that this particular legal view will continue to prevail and should continue to prevail under GST regime also. And therefore 16(4) में जहां पे भी 16(2)(c) की जो कंडीशन है कि बायर ने अगर टैक्स की भुगतान नहीं की है और सेलर ने टैक्स की भुगतान नहीं की है, सॉरी, तो बायर को क्रेडिट नहीं मिलनी चाहिए. Merely for that reason, I feel that section 16(2)(c) is unconstitutional, invalid, and I will not be surprised if it is struck down, because it cannot pass, it has no sanctity in law. It probably cannot pass the constitutional muster also. And it has already been challenged in many cases also. As I said, I will still repeat. However, if the buyer's involvement in the fraud being committed by the supplier, and whereby he is actually not paying the tax, if that involvement is established, then the matter may take the entire different dimension. That should be kept in mind. Coming to the next issue, section 16(4), time limit for availing ITC. Next. Friends, section 16(4) prescribes the time limit for availing the ITC. In short, it says any ITC on any invoice or debit net for a financial year should be taken before the expiry of the due date for furnishing the annual return for that financial year, or the date of filing of the return, due date for the filing of the return for the month of September of the next financial year, of the subsequent financial year. In other words, whichever is earlier. So in other words, today in the current scenario, फाइनेंशियल ईयर 1920 के कोई भी इनवॉइस या डेबिट पे अगर मुझे क्रेडिट लेनी है तो आइदर मुझे एनुअल रिटर्न 1920 के एनुअल रिटर्न की जो ड्यू डेट है या तो फिर सितंबर 20 का जो रिटर्न मुझे जो भरना है विच वॉज यस्टरडे 20 अक्टूबर, ये दोनों में से एक तारीख जो सबसे पहले है उसके पहले मुझे वो क्रेडिट लेनी है. इन अदर वर्ड्स, फॉर 1920 एज पर दिस प्रोविजन my right to claim the credit on invoices or debit note for last year has now expired yesterday. That is the sum and substance of this provision. Similarly, 1819 की जो क्रेडिट थी वो शायद 31st March 20 was the last date, extended date for the September month. So that is also gone. 1718 is also gone. Now the question arises, next please. Next. Okay, whether this time limit is valid in the eyes of law. That is the question which we'll have to answer ourselves. Before that, let me once clarify one important thing. The previous topic में we were discussing about section 16(2) और उसमें 4 condition थी, and those 4 conditions were taxpayer should have received the goods or services, taxpayer should have received the invoices also, supplier should have paid the tax, and recipient taxpayer should have filed the return. These are the 4 conditions. ये 4 condition अगर fulfill हो रही है तो भी section 16(4) की time limit will be relevant as per the plain reading of the law, plain reading of the law. अगर वो 4 में से ही एक कंडीशन अगर मैं फुलफिल नहीं कर रहा हूं तो फिर ये टाइम लिमिट बिकम्स टोटली इमटेरियल. यह बात हमें ख्याल में रखनी है. This time limit is in addition to the 4 conditions prescribed under section 16(2). This should be kept in mind always. Now, the question here is whether this time limit is valid or not. If you see, the time limit speaks about 2 dates. One is due date for furnishing the return for annual return of the financial year, which normally is 31st December of the next financial year, or the date of furnishing the return for the September, succeeding financial year. So 1920 के लिए September 20 का रिटर्न जो ड्यू डेट है वो मैं कर रहा हूँ. Here the due date everybody understands is to be written to be 3B. So अगर GSTR 3B जो मैं 20 अक्टूबर को फाइल कर रहा हूँ इसलिए मेरी टाइम लिमिट एक्सपायर हो गई. दिस इज द जनरल अंडरस्टैंडिंग. लीगली इज इट रियली सो? दैट इज द क्वेश्चन वी हैव टू आस्क आवरसेल्व्स. There are quite a few aspects from which this entire issue can be discussed and understood. First of all, in my opinion, section 16(1) जो paramount section है, which allows the benefit of ITC, reading that section, in terms of that section 16(1), whether this type of time limit can be prescribed and whereby such a arbitrary time limit can be prescribed or not, and whether my right to claim the credit rightfully can be taken away, in my opinion, this is a serious subject matter of challenge. These are all for the High Court to decide. But yes, it can be challenged on the ground that the time limit prescribed under section 16(4) is invalid, discriminatory, and unreasonable. The second is, and which is much more important, which is important thing, the return की जो बात की गई है section 16(4) में, that is under section 39. Section 39 prescribes the return to be filed in form 3. As you know, GSTR form 3. However, section 38 में GSTR 2 and section 39 में GSTR 3, as all of you are aware, they are on the they are right now under suspension. Practically, they are suspended sine die. So they are not under operation. इनकी जगह हम GSTR 3B फाइल कर रहे हैं. So therefore, the question arises whether 3B can be said to be a return in lieu of 3. If the answer is yes, then obviously this time limit will be operative. If the answer is no, then this time limit cannot be said to be operative. If you see, by 49/2019, the amendment was made to Rule 61(5). Rule 61(5) में amendment करके उसको retrospective effect दी गई है, whereby 3B has been now declared as a return in lieu of 3. The words used is not in lieu of. What has been done is this, कि अगर tax payer अगर 3B file कर रहा है, then commissioner will notify that he did not file 3. It means the intention is this, that the 3B is in replacing 3. Can it be done so, and whether is it really so? Without going into the history in detail, friends, if you see when the 3B was introduced, GST Council meeting, if you see in detail, GST Council had the never considered 3B as a replacing 3 or in lieu of 3. They have always called it as a stopgap arrangement. It was a stopgap arrangement. It remains a stopgap arrangement. By rules, it cannot be made a return replacing 3. Incidentally, initially 20 दिन के लिए, July 17 में ही 20 दिन के लिए 3B was actually made in lieu of 3. However, immediately thereafter, government actually removed omitted the words in lieu of. So their intention was very clear that 3B is not a substantial return like 3. And now it cannot be made or cannot be considered as a in lieu of 3. Agar GSTR 3B cannot be said to be in lieu of 3, then the question of, my considering it as a return under section 39 for the purpose of section 16.4 does not arise. If it is my contention, and which is my contention also in fact, that 3B being not a return in lieu of 3, 3B cannot replace 3, Rule 61.5 and the retrospective amendment is definitely subject matter of a serious challenge, and it has already been challenged, as I mentioned some of the cases over here. Therefore, Append Company, no doubt, that was the first judgment, but that has already been notice has been issued by the Supreme Court. It is before Supreme Court. Thereafter, all these amendments have taken place. The question here is that अगर 3B3 की replacement नहीं है या in lieu of 3 नहीं है, then my September 20 ka return, which I filed yesterday, or for which the last date was yesterday, it is only for 3B, not for the return GSTR 3 under section 39. And GSTR 3 is not even operative today. It is under suspension. That be the case, the question of applying section 16.4 does not arise at all. To put it other way around, 2 dates are given under section 16.4 फॉर क्रेडिट लेने के लिए जो समय मर्यादा निश्चित की गई है सेक्शन 16.4 में, उसमें 2 डेट दी गई है. दोनों में से जो अर्लीस्ट है मुझे लागू करनी है. एक है एनुअल रिटर्न की ड्यू डेट, या तो फिर सितंबर महीने की सेक्शन 39 में जो रिटर्न में फाइल कर रहा हूं नेक्स्ट ईयर के सितंबर की, वो डेट. बट एनुअल रिटर्न तो चलो फिक्स है, वो ड्यू डेट मुझे पता है क्या है. हाउएवर अगर सपोज 18-19 की जो ड्यू डेट सितंबर महीने की थी, मान लो वो 20 अक्टूबर थी, 20 अक्टूबर 19 थी, 20 अक्टूबर 20 है, 18-19 की 19 थी, आई एम सॉरी, 18-19 के फाइनेंशियल जिसका एनुअल रिटर्न हमें अभी बाकी है, भरना बाकी है, उसकी एनुअल रिटर्न डेट आज की तारीख में 31 अक्टूबर है. उसकी सितंबर 19 को रिटर्न 20 अक्टूबर थी. तो क्या 18-19 की डेट कानून के हिसाब से 20 अक्टूबर 19 गिनी जाएगी और उसके पहले मुझे क्रेडिट लेनी थी, आज मैं नहीं ले सकता हूं, ये प्लेन मीनिंग है. परंतु अगर मेरा ये कंटेंशन है, अगर मैं ये बात है कि मेरा 3B इज नॉट ए रिप्लेसिंग 3 एट ऑल, और 3 की तो कोई डेट ही नहीं है, वो तो सस्पेंडेड है, तो मेरे सितंबर 19 के रिटर्न की डेट आई, वो मैं कैसे कह सकता हूं? वो डेट आई ही नहीं है. इफ वन डेट इज मिसिंग टू बी डिटरमिन्ड, then there is no question of applying section 16.4 at all. And therefore, in my personal opinion, the credit can also be taken even for 17-18 today if genuinely somebody has missed. It can also be taken even for 18-19 if somebody has missed, and even for 19-20 if somebody has not taken yesterday. I know GST and again system will not allow this to be taken, and there is absolutely no harm in claiming this right through the manual filing and then take it up the matter, because this matter is right now before 3-4 high courts in matter. And personally, I feel that there is an extremely serious challenges on various grounds against this entire provision. Sum and substance, even if, to conclude, even if I presume that the legislature के पास सत्ता है, समय मर्यादा ITC क्रेडिट लेने के लिए निश्चित करने की सत्ता है, और वो पावर से, that is a legislative prerogative. Even if I accept that, then also in the today's scheme of the things, this time limit is not operative, cannot be made operative at all in view of the various challenges and various issues connected with this entire controversial issue, and therefore there is no harm in staking the claim even today. Next. (36.4). Again, another headache. Next. You know that, friends, on the same date when the Rule 61(5) was actually replaced and was given retrospective effect, जो अभी हमने discuss किया, by the same notification, Sub Rule 4 was introduced in Rule 36. और sum and substance of this rule is this, कि हर month के end में मैं GSTR 1 फाइल कर रहा हूँ, और उसके बाद जो 3B और मेरे वेंडर्स भी GSTR 1 फाइल कर रहे हैं, which are thereafter auto populated in the form of 2A, जो 2A में recipient buyer की तरह में I am able to actually look at it in the system. और वो 2A पे जो मुझे वेंडर्स के इनवॉइसेस अगर अपलोड नहीं हुए हैं, then I have to restrict my credit. जो वेंडर्स के इनवॉइसेस अगर नहीं हुए हैं, तो मुझे I have to restrict my credit to the extent of 20% of the eligible credit, and which was later on now reduced to 10%. Mind you, this rule, as you are all aware, जहां पे जो वेंडर के इनवॉइसेस मुझे फुल दिख रहे हैं, अपलोड हो चुके हैं, वो मैं फुल ले रहा हूं. बट सिवाय अगर कोई भी इनवॉइसेस, कोई भी वेंडर के एक भी इनवॉइस अगर अपलोड नहीं हुआ है, तो टू दैट एक्सटेंट मुझे टोटल एलिजिबल क्रेडिट जिनके अपलोड, जो आई विल कॉल इट ए रिकंसाइल, जो रिकंसाइल इनवॉइसेस पे मुझे फुल क्रेडिट मिलेगी, अनरिकंसाइल इनवॉइसेस पे मुझे टोटल रिकंसाइल क्रेडिट की 10% मिलेगी आज की तारीख में. And whether this provision is valid in the eyes of law or not, that is the subject which we will be challenging. You know that कि कोविड के कारण उसको ये पूरे प्रोविजन को सस्पेंशन में रखा गया था. अप टू अप्रैल टू अगस्त यू कैन नाउ डू इट अप टू 20 अक्टूबर, और सितंबर का आपको सेपरेट करना है, जिसके बारे में बोर्ड ने 10 दिन पहले जो सर्कुलर इश्यू किया था. आई एम नॉट गोइंग इनटू द टेक्निकल निटी-ग्रिटी ऑफ दैट. टुडे वी आर लुकिंग इनटू वेदर दिस रिस्ट्रिक्शन इज वैलिड और नॉट. नेक्स्ट. This restriction is closely related to Rule 61. And being closely related to Rule 61, these can be Sub Rule 5, जो उन्होंने किया है. So without going into too much of detail, just take the next slide, please. Yes, ये उनकी history है. Now the question is, first of all, 36(4), if everything stems from section 16. सेक्शन 16 में सबसे पहले कहीं पे भी ऐसी कोई भी प्रोविजन नहीं है. देयर इज एब्सोल्युटली नो प्रोविजन whereby my right to claim the credit can be restricted on the basis of the information or what has been done or what has not been done by the third parties. जिस तरह से मेरे वेंडर ने अगर टैक्स नहीं भरा है, but genuinely I am a bona fide buyer, I have paid the tax, I have actually paid him also, I cannot be denied the credit, जो अभी हमने जिसके बारे में चर्चा की. Similarly, अगर मेरे वेंडर कोई भी कारण से अगर इनवॉइस अपलोड नहीं कर रहे हैं, I cannot be given the restricted credit. Section 16 में ऐसे कोई powers नहीं है whereby such type of restriction can be put under. So in my opinion, Rule 36(4) is ultra vires Section 16. Secondly, rule cannot actually overreach or cannot go beyond the statute. You know that the reimbursable expenditure में Senvet credit में service tax में Intercontinental Delhi High Court had declared the Rule 5 whereby these reimbursable expenditure were subjected to the tax subject to condition as ultra vires, and this was upheld by the Supreme Court also. The same principle will apply here. Rule cannot, 36(4) is going beyond section 16, and therefore the I cannot actually we denied that credit. Friends, I beg your pardon. ये 36.4 की डिस्कशन की स्लाइड है, ऊपर का हेडिंग कुछ बाय मिस्टेक that has been actually wrongly mentioned, so don't get confused. I will change it and I will send the modified PPT. जो भी मिस्टेक छोटी मोटी इसमें है. The another thing is the entire condition of matching the credit is under section 43 and 43A, right? From there the power flows. Such power cannot be traced under section 16 at all. 36.4 is basically 2A, वो matching की बात है. That matching के powers are not there at all. Section 16 does not deal with the matching at all. It is being dealt with under section 42, 43 and 43A at all. And the entire this credit, which is not only unreasonable, it is also practically inoperative also. There are practical situations whereby this entire operation 36.4 cannot be made operative. I'll give you one example. Suppose my unreconciled credit जो invoices जो upload नहीं हुए हैं, वो अगर 10% से नीचे है, 10%, reconciled credit के 10% से total quantum of credit involved is lesser than 10%, I am not required to follow 36.4 at all. Because the wording of 36.4 is that the taxpayer should not take the credit, should take the credit not more than 10% of the ITC, which is reconciled, not more than 10%. It is how it is worded. अगर मेरी unreconciled credit ही totally जिसके upload नहीं हुए हैं, वो ही अगर 10% के नीचे है, then 36.4 will not come into play at all. To that extent, this rule is also arbitrary and discriminatory. Similarly, जो लोग क्वार्टरली रिटर्न भर रहे हैं, जो मेरे वेंडर्स है, जो क्वार्टरली रिटर्न भर रहे हैं, because they are small vendors, till the quarter is ended, their invoice will not reflect under 2A. Based on that, whether can I be disallowed the credit as a buyer? From that perspective also, the validity of this rule can be seriously challenged. I understand कि अभी 2B वगैरह में they are going to take जनवरी के बाद पूरे सिनेरियो चेंज होने की संभावना है. The purpose and objective behind introduction of this absolutely absurd provision has been to because they found that there has been a lot of gap in the filing of the returns vis-a-vis the number of people who are registered. So basically to discipline them and to basically force them to come forward and file the returns and to upload the invoices, this provision has been introduced. But having said that, the validity and constitutional validity of this provision is under serious challenge. It has already been challenged before few high courts. And based on this provision, अगर department कोई भी action recovery की ले रहे हैं, like a recovery and freezing the ITC account, freezing the bank account, again, it can definitely be challenged before the high court. And it should be challenged. Next. Next. Yes, section 16. Sorry, previous one. Yeah, these are the two extra topics which I wanted to speak about. Section 16, ITC and failure to pay the supplier. If you friends, you are aware that there is a condition for making the payment to the vendor under section 16(2) second and third proviso. हमने चार कंडीशन की बात की section 16(2) में. Just to repeat, the recipient taxpayer should have received the goods or services. He should be in the possession of the valid invoice. Supplier should have paid the tax, and the recipient taxpayer should have filed the return under section 39. These are the four conditions. Fifth condition is about the time limit, within which period he should take the credit for a particular invoice or debit note for a particular financial year. This was, and the sixth condition, यहाँ पे भी ये पांच condition अगर हम उसकी the validity को मान्य भी रखे, कानूनन उसको मान्य भी रखे, तो यहाँ पे भी बात खत्म नहीं होती है. There is a sixth condition that the buyer should actually make the payment to the supplier within 180 days of the date of issue of the invoice by the supplier. And this condition, basically you will find under Rule 7 of the Senvet Credit Rules, in case of services, this condition had been prescribed. The buyer has to make the payment within the stipulated time. This has been continued even under GST. Now the question is, कि if there is a failure, if the buyer, recipient buyer अगर 180 days में, जो COVID-19 के इस एरा में ऐसी शक्यता बारोबार है, वह काफी है कि जहां पे buyer may not be in a position to make the payment to the supplier within 180 days. और ये किससे अभी नजर आ रहे हैं सामने, तो buyer has to reverse the credit with interest thereon. लेकिन when he makes the payment against to the supplier later on, suppose 10 महीने के बाद अगर वो पेमेंट कर रहा है, तो he can again take back the credit, but he will not be able to take the credit or refund of the interest. So interest will become the cost in his hands. Earlier service tax regime में there was no specific provision for the payment of interest. There was no specific provision, and it was only disputed matter where department sometimes used to ask for the interest. However, यहाँ पे specific provision किया गया है whereby it is provided that the reversal of the ITC should be with interest only. The question arises is interest from which date? From the date of invoice, when I mean from the date of taking the credit based on the invoice, or whether from the date of from the 181st day. In personally, it is my opinion that the interest should be payable only from the 181st day. And thereafter, when he makes the payment, he can recredit. Rule 37 में पूरा procedure दिया गया है. Now the point here is that whether this condition जो है, whether it is valid. Again, if you see section 16(2) proviso, इसके अंतर्गत ये 180 days की condition दी गई है. And if you compare it with the language of Rule 37, there is a too much of the variation in the gap between these two. Too much of the. And yeah, I beg your pardon. Under Rule 37, Sub-Rule 3, there is a specific provision that the interest will be from the date of availing the ITC and not from the 181st day. That should be kept in mind. And this, and mind you, 180 days are to be reckoned from the date of invoice and not from the date of receipt of the invoice, not from the date of the recording of the invoice in the books of the accounts of the buyer, not from the date of the accounting. It is from the date of invoice. That should be kept in mind. और वहां से मुझे 180 days की गिनती करनी है. If you see the entire rule, 37 rule is very, very badly worded, and in some respects, the validity of this provision can also be challenged. But I would only say caution is the better part of the valor, and therefore it would be better if this particular condition is fulfilled to the maximum possible. It may not be worth his while to make it a litigative issue, and it would be better either to comply with it by making the payment within 180 days or to reverse the credit within 180 days and thereafter taking the recredit. And let me make it very clear, under Rule 37(4), it is very clearly provided that the time limit specified under Section 16(4) for taking the credit will not apply to the recredit of such credit reverse after 180 days. To explain it, अगर recipient buyer ने 180 days में पेमेंट न करने की वजह से आईटीसी अगर रिवर्स की है इंटरेस्ट के साथ में, और उसके बाद अगर वो मान लो कि जब भी 6 महीने, 8 महीने, 1 महीने, 1 साल के बाद भी अगर वो पेमेंट अपने बायर को कर रहा, सप्लायर को कर रहा है, तो वो क्रेडिट उसको, he can take that credit, he will have to declare this through the return. The time limit which is prescribed under section 16(4) कि आप नेक्स्ट ईयर के फाइनेंशियल ईयर के सितंबर के उसके बाद आप ये क्रेडिट नहीं ले सकते हो, that time limit will not be applicable to the recredit of the ITC which is already reversed under this particular provision. ये बात आपको ख्याल में रखनी है. Therefore, this is very important, and there is a specific provision for this which is made under Rule 37 Sub-Rule 4. Next. Annual return and reconciliation statement. Friends, I have to only say this. There are some couple of writs which have already been filed. People are anxiously waiting whether 9 and 9C, whether it will be extended further or not. एनुअल रिटर्न जहां तक 9 का सवाल है, up to 2 crore, there is absolutely, it has been made optional. It is for the taxpayer to take a call and tax advisor to correctly and professionally advise his client whether he should really file it or not, though it is optional. It may not be advisable to force the taxpayer to file uh, by, I mean, one has to take a very ethical and moral call into this, whether I should ask my taxpayer to file the annual return or not when he is below 2 crore. This will apply to composition taxpayers also. So for them, 1819 is now optional. Coming to the between 2 crore and 5 crore, the 9 is compulsory. They have to file annual return, but 9C is actually not required to be filed. That has been exempted for this class of buyers. And above 5 crore, 9 and 9C both are compulsory. Now above 5 crore जिनके लिए 9 और 9C compulsory है, since 9C के लिए specifically कोई due date नहीं है, 9C cannot be filed unless and until 9 is filed, then obviously 9 की due date अपने आप 9C के लिए भी हो जाती है. और वो due date 31st October है. Now obviously in this COVID situation, all the taxpayers and tax professionals are under tremendous pressure, and obviously they may not be in a position to finalize the 9 and 9C. Personally, my feeling is this, that there is no need to worry. This 31st October time limit should get extended further, maybe mostly by 2 months, but maybe in 2 installments, 1 month each. And that could be probably, so one need not really. And assuming for a moment, I've been telling my old CA fraternity, my brother, I mean telling repeatedly to them, okay, please, these are very difficult days. These are unusual times because of COVID-19. We have a lot to take care of ourselves and our family also. Don't worry about missing the deadline. Suppose 31st October मान लो कि एक्सटेंड नहीं भी हुई, वो एक्सटेंड हो रही है, ये मेरा पक्का विश्वास है. शायद एक महीने के लिए 2 बार एक्सटेंड होगी, या वो तो होगी, वो मेरा पक्का पूरा विश्वास है. मान लो चलो हाइपोथेटिकली नहीं भी हुई, and you are filing it say on 15th November, you may file it in December, you may file it in January. Then what is the sky is not going to fall, कोई आसमान तो गिरने वाला नहीं है. There is a simpliciter, a late fee which will be payable per day, which is peanuts considering everything. और 9C के लिए तो late fee भी नहीं है, सिर्फ पेनल्टी है 25,000 मैक्सिमम. If for any reason कोई भी हमारे क्लाइंट के 9 और 9C हम 31st अक्टूबर के पहले फाइल नहीं कर पाते हैं, despite our best efforts and client best efforts also, and अगर डेट एक्सटेंड नहीं होती है, तो प्लीज टेक द क्लाइंट इनटू कॉन्फिडेंस. डोंट वर्क योरसेल्फ टू डेथ. प्लीज डोंट डू दैट. देयर इज नथिंग टू वरी अबाउट, एंड डोंट डू एनी जॉब इन द हेस्ट. And mind you, I am told this discussion I had with one of the senior most officers who is connected with the GST Council. He himself has been really concerned. बोले कि शैलेश, why CA fraternity should be so much worried about? Because it would be much more dangerous to make the mistake in the haste in preparing the 9 and 9C so as to meet the deadline, then file the belated 9 and 9C but correctly. Choice is yours. Health is must, safety is must, precautions and prayers are going to be the watchwords for us because COVID is not going to leave us for a long time. Maybe another 5 months, 6 months, I don't know. I don't know to timeline. I know मुझे पूरा मार्च महीना, जैसे मैं मार्च महीने से घर पे हूं, मुझे मार्च महीने तक घर पे रहना है, ये मेरी मानसिक तैयारी है. So that is important. And on top of that, please do not worry, don't make any haste. दाखिल करने के लिए, डेडलाइन को मीट करने के लिए 9 और 9C भरने की आप चेष्टा न करें. आप लेट भी हो गया, अपने क्लाइंट को कॉन्फिडेंस में लेके एक्सप्लेनिंग हिम द सर्कमस्टेंसेस, डोंट वरी अबाउट इट, ट्राई टू फाइल इट इन द बेस्ट पॉसिबल मैनर, but without jeopardizing anything. Your safety, your health, and also the correctness of the return, which is paramount. Because ये return बाद में आप revise नहीं कर पाओगे, and then it will have a very serious ramifications, which should be avoided. This is my humble request to all of you. In last 2-3 years, I've been seeing how the my dear chartered accountant brother, sister, how they have been working under tremendous pressure. I am an advocate. I have nothing to do with the compliance practice, friends. But I have been seeing that under what type of pressure they have been working. Please don't need to work under so much of pressure. And I have seen a few very young people, who have succumbed finally, which is extremely tragic and unfortunate. So take care of yourself. This type of compliance cannot be allowed to really dictate your life and your personal life. This is my personal request to all of you, my personal suggestion to all of you. बाकी मुझे पूरा विश्वास है that this is going to be extended. Next, don't quote me, please. Yeah, next. And finally, friends, so these are the overall the subjects which I wanted to clear. Mohit Mindals and Sal Steels Limited, these are the two important judgments of the Gujarat High Court, जिसमें गुजरात हाई कोर्ट ने ओशन फ्रेट पे मोहित मिंडल में जीएसटी लेवी को खारिज किया है और साल स्टील्स लिमिटेड में गुजरात हाई कोर्ट ने सर्विस टैक्स की लेवी को खारिज किया है. They have declared the provisions and the relevant notifications as ultra virus. These are two very, very sound judgment. After that, in 2018, just like the air freight, ocean freight has also been subjected to exemption. And now the exemption has been continued up to 30th September 2021. For one more year, it has been continued. In my personal opinion, ocean freight could not have been subjected to GST, nor was it subjected to service tax at all. जिन्होंने ocean freight पे who have been compelled to pay the GST or who have been compelled to pay the service tax due to audit or due to DGGI action or any other departmental action, they can certainly challenge it by way of a high court. अगर GST उनसे वसूलात की गई है even before the exemption and even before 2018, ocean freight could not have been subjected under reverse. Importer could not have been subjected to reverse charge under for ocean freight at all. When CIF पे जो custom duty वगैरह पे हो रही है, there are number of grounds. I am not going into detail. High Court has also gone into detail. Sum and substance, one of the major ground is that under section 9 subsection 3, जब मेरे foreign supplier मुझे by sea जब material भेज रहा है और वो CIF value पे जब मैं tax भर रहा हूँ, the contract is also CIF, and thereafter he is actually sending me the goods. In that case, I am actually not engaging the shipping line. They are being engaged by the foreign supplier, and under 9.3 only recipient can be made liable. Recipient of the service can be made liable to pay tax under reverse charge. ये जो sea transportation की service जो shipping line की है, वो मैं recipient as a importer, I am not the recipient of service. Recipient has been defined under section 2 under CGST Act as a one person who receives the goods or services or both and who is liable for the payment of the consideration. तो शिपिंग लाइन को पेमेंट कंसिडरेशन पे करने के लिए आई एम नॉट द रिस्पॉन्सिबल पर्सन एंड देयरफॉर आई कैन नॉट बी कंसिडर्ड टू बी रिसिपिएंट ऑफ द sea transportation service from the shipping line for the goods which I am procuring from foreign supplier under a contract, under a CIF contract, and therefore this reverse charge mechanism was per se unconstitutional and ultra virus section 9.3. And there are a number of other arguments. I'm also of the opinion that these apply to even FOB contracts also. Therefore, under these circumstances, those who have been compelled to pay the service tax or those who have been compelled to pay the GST on the ocean freight, that demand or that recovery can certainly be challenged. So these are, friends, my overall today's hot burning issues, which I thought I would dwell with you. And this concludes. These are all live issues. Most of the issues are before the High Court. They are all being argued upon. Whether it is, except one can say, probably the section 50, recovery of interest on the gross amount would stand settled. However, there also the question would arise about the refund, my right to claim the refund of the interest which I have paid on the gross amount, including on the ITC portion. I have already explained that refund can be stayed. Otherwise, at least from the demand perspective, that issue is now probably more or less resolved by the government by force, but it has been done. We should wait for the now next retrospective amendment in the financial bill, whereby they will make it retrospective from 1st July. All other issues are live issues. They are all burning issues, and most of the issues involve the validity of the provisions, constitutional validity of the provisions, and they are all before the different high courts. Given the facts and circumstances of the case, these are all the issues which are worth out for, as I would say. And one has to be just very much alert and watchful on the developments taking place on each of these issues in the coming days. Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the fruitful session. Friends, if you have any queries, you can post it, or you can request for unmuting yourself. The session is open. If the Celestial allow, we can have some queries.
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Okay. Members, if you have any queries, you can raise your hand. We can unmute you, or you can just type.
Either they can raise the hand, then they can start asking also.
So there is a query that can we ask any query regarding annual return?
You can ask the query regarding annual return, but generally,
There
because
is a
I
query
don't,
regarding.
I don't get into the compliance practice, but still, whatever query, let me see if I can answer, I will answer, no problem.
Okay, friends, you can go ahead with your queries.
Sir, one of the issue is relating to interest, and
Yeah.
that is now the circular has already been issued that interest should be available, chargeable only on the net amount, not on the gross amount. Now,
Right.
still the controversy between the Madras High Court and the Gujarat High Court, shall it remain? And has the government gone to the Supreme Court? And even if the Supreme Court decide either way, but the legality of the circular issued in, I think, June, I think, very recently, 2020, which is a retrospective effect.
So there is, as I understand, the controversy, conflicting judgments, not Gujarat, conflicting judgments are between Orissa Mega Engineering and the Madras High Court Refex.
Okay.
And the latest judgment will be under Mansarovar, which is yet not out. The judgment is still not out, but Madras High Court has given a favorable ruling, and we are probably hoping that High Court has also held that this amendment is retrospective. So, in my opinion, as far as the controversy is concerned with the retrospective amendment, which will be carried out, मेरे हिसाब से वो या तो taxation laws amendment bill से होगा, शायद government अगर वो नहीं लाती है winter session में, so then it will be done through the finance bill in the budget, and it will be given retrospective effect from 1st of July. So वो controversy बाद में रहती नहीं है, कुछ भी, right? The only thing is that कि जिन्होंने interest, जैसे मैंने कहा आगे, जिन्होंने ये इंटरेस्ट ग्रोस अमाउंट पे बाय फोर्स भरा है, या जिनके पास से गार्निशी प्रोविजन थ्रू या फिर और कोई तरह से अगर रिकवर किया गया है ग्रोस अमाउंट पे, दे कैन डायरेक्टली फाइल द रिफंड क्लेम. अगर 2 साल सेक्शन 54 में अवेलेबल है तो फ्रॉम द डेट ऑफ रिकवरी पेमेंट, और अगर 2 साल चले भी गए हैं, दे शुड स्टिल फाइल द रिफंड क्लेम आफ्टर ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ ऑल दिस अमेंडमेंट्स इन द बोर्ड सर्क्यूलर. This is now retrospective and the recovery is not permissible. This cannot apply only to the new people, fresh people, or it should apply to everybody, and then keep the claim alive.
One thing more, let me compliment you, sir, a great presentation, but it also leaves us a little worried as to what is the state of implementation of the GST ahead, particularly.
Sir, my personal feeling is, and I'm privileged to normally address CA fraternity right from, I've been giving talks on GST since 2015 practically.
Yeah.
But in last 3.5 years, sub 75 odd lectures which I gave, maybe more than 80 probably after these webinars. So in last few months, majority of them, I'm fortunate to address the CA fraternity.
Yeah.
2 things I would say. GST is not going to settle, friends, anytime soon. It is not settled anywhere in the world. Right? There is a lot of discussion going on at the OECD. OECD is at the forefront. Organization of Economic and Cooperation Development Countries, जो 32 countries का जो समूह बना हुआ है, एक संयुक्त समूह है. They are at the forefront of the GST or VAT design. Lot of work is going on behind the curtain since last more than 2-3 decades probably. In fact, including whether there is a viable alternative to even GST philosophy also. So these are all going on. But today, GST is getting implemented through there are three ways by which GST can be implemented. One is invoice credit method, second is capital addition method, and third is subtraction method. अब कैपिटल एडिशन मेथड और सब्ट्रैक्शन मेथड नोबडी फॉलोज. लास्ट में खाली जापान कर रहा था, लेकिन नाउ इवन एवरीबडी हैज फॉलन इनटू इनवॉइस क्रेडिट मेथड. I buy my procurement of goods and services under invoice. I pay the tax. I take the credit on the basis of invoice. I discharge my liability on the basis of my invoice only, under which I'm making the supplies, and adjust the credit. This is the simple value addition. Effectively, I am paying value addition. But because of the very nature, self-enforcing policy of the GST, कि जब मुझे क्रेडिट मिल रही है तो मैं क्यों इनवॉइस बिना इनवॉइस का माल लूं? This is probably not working, and men are men. Nobody wants to pay the tax even under this regime. We are seeing type of frauds which are getting committed. So 2-3 things I would say. GST probably will not get. It is a very fraud-prone tax. There are 13 to 14 type of different frauds which are identified under GST regime, which are all tabulated. Please don't ask me what are those frauds. So therefore, it is a very fraud-prone tax, which will continue to be a challenge for the economy. As a professional people and as a citizens of this great country, my personal request would be to see that even unknowingly, unwittingly, unintentionally also, we should not be encouraging this fraud in any manner. That is one part of it. Second, GST will not get settled. It will be continuously evolution process. I am expecting in another couple of years, and I've been advocating continuously in last 1 year, okay, please don't make any major amendments. Instead of that, let this law in whatever form you have amended, usko settle hone do. People have understood in whatever manner, let them implement this law. But simultaneously, start working on the entirely new legislation based on the experience and the lessons we have learned in last 3 years. Let it come in 2025, 2060, 26, whenever. But ये लो में अभी आप ज्यादा छेड़छाड़ मत कीजिए. That is my earnest request continuously on this. Having said that, the compliance will become more and more difficult under GST as I see that. For the professional tax professionals, regulatory pressure is going to increase in coming days. This I have been saying in last 6-7 years continuously, not only under indirect tax, even under corporate laws, even under IT, even under other law. Since chartered accountants are expected to be, their grooming is such that normally they get involved into many fields. Your regulatory pressure ko withstand karna, client would be only looking at upon you. Please understand ke how far, what type of pressure you can take. Compliance will have a very, very limited role to play in the coming years. World over में compliance practice ज़्यादा इसको ज़्यादा महत्व नहीं दिया जाता है. Because GST is a new law, therefore here there is a too much of pressure on the compliance and 9 and 9C and 1 and 2A and 2B. In the coming years, compliance practice will become unaffordable either for the professional or it will become unaffordable for the client. Please believe me, this is my reading. And therefore, one has to continuously raise the bar. Law को पढ़ना है, बेयर एक्ट को पढ़ना है, व्हाट्सएप पे एडवाइस नहीं मांगनी है पहले डायरेक्टली, सर्कुलर को नहीं महत्व देना है डायरेक्टली. Advance authority ruling, I would not say anything about advance authority ruling. Please read the Bare Act. Unless you read the Bare Act and rules, try to understand, read and analyze yourself. One would never be able to read. GST is a very fascinating piece of legislation. There is going to be a floodgate of litigation which is going to open in coming days. ये कोविड के कारण हुआ नहीं है, फिर भी शुरुआत तो हो चुकी है. ये भी मैं पिछले 1.5-2 साल से कह रहा हूँ ओपनली प्लेटफॉर्म से. आप लोगों को you have to as a professional continue to raise the bar and the quality of the dispute which you are handling, you have to look into this. Compliance जो करना है, जो unavoidable है उतना ही करना है. Compliance will not be the lifeline practice, believe me this. This is my personal view.
Friends, any more queries? So there is a question regarding annual return.
Yes.
While filing annual return for financial year 2017-18, ITC credit of financial year 2018 is considered. what should be done while annual return of financial year 2018 and 19?
नो इट मींस दैट कि 17-18 की क्रेडिट जो छूट गई थी शायद 17-18 में लेनी थी, वो आप एनुअल रिटर्न में 18-19 में आपने ली है और उसमें आपने दिखाई है। 17-18 में आप दिखा रहे हो, तो 18-19 के क्रेडिट में यू सी प्रीवियस ईयर की कॉलम की भी शायद कॉलम है उसमें कि आपने ये क्रेडिट 17-18 की ली है। देयर इज अ कॉलम प्रोबेबली कि द पास्ट ईयर ऑफ 17-18 की क्रेडिट हमने 18-19 में ली है, एंड देयर इज अ सेपरेट कॉलम फॉर दैट, नथिंग टू बी डन अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट। इट शुड बी शोन इन अ सेपरेट कॉलम, एंड 9C में भी शायद इसके लिए कॉलम है।
Hello.
यस मैम।
Sir, actually the query is that when filing the return for 17-18, ITC of 18-19 is being taken.
ओके, सो एक्चुअली आपने अप्रैल के बाद जो क्रेडिट आपके 18-19 में व्हिच इज ऑलरेडी अक्रूड टू यू,
Yes, yes.
that and because credit is suppose accrued in April 18, you have filed the 17-18 return say in June 18,
Yes.
and while filing in June 18 you have taken that April 18 credit.
Yes, actually the bills were pertaining to 17-18, but the materials were received in 18-19. That's why the credit was taken.
But
by mistake they had interpreted in that manner.
नहीं, one sec. First of all, was it taken before the September? Suppose हम 16/4 की time limit को मान्य करते हैं, if we are agreeing to the time limit, was it taken before September 18?
Yes, it is taken before September 18, but
then
in
what is wrong in that?
In books of accounts, the entry is pertaining in 18-19 only.
Correct. So invoice is of 17-18.
Yes,
correct.
Material is received in 18-19.
Material was received in 18-19, and when the credit was taken?
In April 18.
April 18. Then what is wrong in that, madam?
But while filing the annual return of 17-18.
No, that is only a mistake. That is only a mistake. It should not have been shown in the annual return. That's all.
So what should be done?
You see the matter.
18-19.
नहीं, in 18-19 आप वापस बता दीजिए ना उसको. You show it in 18-19.
तो फिर 17-18 का जो भी है.
नहीं, that you see. I'll tell you one thing. Matter would have been a different problem. The problem would have been अगर on the basis of the invoice recorded in 17-18 जब आपके पास मटेरियल नहीं आया है, फिर भी अगर इनवॉइस के बेस पे अगर आपने 17-18 में क्रेडिट ले ली होती, then there would have been a problem because that is not allowed.
Yes.
Correct. But yes. You have received the material in 18-19. Invoices of 17-18. अगर मटेरियल 17-18 में आ भी गया होता under the invoice, still you have time up to September 18 to claim the credit which legislature has given you.
Okay.
So legislature has already recognized that a taxpayer can take the credit even in the next year also.
Yes.
इसीलिए तो next year के September तक की time limit दे गई है. Correct. तो आपको उसको 18-19 में दिखाना है. Annual return does not create as such any liability. You can only later on in the reconciliation, if you want, you can write a letter that this was inadvertently also shown in 17-18, though the credit was taken in 18-19, which has now been shown in the 18-19 annual return.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So
because this will also tally with your 3B of 18-19.
Okay. तो कुछ भी हमें DRC 30 चलन से कुछ पे करवाने की जरूरत
नहीं, कुछ भी नहीं, कहीं पर करवानी जरूर नहीं मैडम. Nothing is required.
Thank you sir.
Friends, any more queries? Sir, since there are no more queries, I would like
that is fine. I understand. It is probably a bit exhaustive and tiring one. So
no,
I'm
sir,
sure.
It was a wonderful session. Just I would like to give the formal vote of thanks. It was indeed a pleasure of Surat branch of ICI to have you here. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. We would like that you have completed your 80th lecture for CA fraternity and advocates. We would like to wish you that soon you can complete your century, and that too with our branch, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. It has been my pleasure for such a patient and such a wholehearted, the participation. I will just modify some correction. I need to do this in the PowerPoint presentation. So please hold it on for some time. Mostly tomorrow I will send it across, and then the branch can actually circulate among the members. Right?
Okay, sir. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, and all the good luck to everybody. Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.